Talk Shoes. Recorded live.
Hello, everybody, and happy Valentine's Day to you. This is the February 14th edition of the Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show, a service of the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website, and my name is William Hayashi. I'll be your host, as most times, and tonight our special guest is Nettrice Gaskins. That's right? Gaskins?
Yeah.
And she is coming to us from, where are you tonight?
I'm in Atlanta.
And how is your weather? I'm not going to make fun of people who don't know how to drive on snow or don't have any plows, but I mean, are things pretty cleared up down there by now, or did you get hit by another storm?
Well, no, I think this is two storms, so this is the second storm for the year, this week. So snow's not the issue, it's the ice that's the issue.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they don't, this time around though, they had federal, I guess, feds helped, so there were trucks putting down sand and gravel and salt. So now what happens is all the snow's melted away, and now there's dust from the gravel and salt.
Oh, yeah.
So.
It's always great when a piece of rock hits you in the windshield and you get a nice crack or something like that. But I mean, all in all, you stayed pretty safe. You didn't have any mishaps or anything like that?
No. Made some snow angels, played around the snow. I had a good time.
Okay. And what's the temperature now?
It's heading towards, well, now it's kind of chilly, but we're heading towards 660s in the next couple of days, so we'll be in the mid-50s this weekend.
Man, I'm telling you, here in Chicago, it's just been awful.
Yeah.
All right, so anyway, let's get to you. I mean, I have a bio here, a bunch of stuff about you, but let's talk about how, well, first of all, let's start out, where did you grow up?
I was born in Baltimore, Maryland, but I was only there for 1 year, and in Johns Hopkins Hospital, and I, from age 1 till 17, I was in Louisville, Kentucky, or as they say, Louisville, Kentucky, and
Louisville,
New York for about 8 years, Chicago for 2 years, Boston for about 10 years, and now Atlanta.
Where did you stay in Chicago?
I lived in a community arts center called the Boulevard Arts Center in Inglewood.
You know, it's I've spent a little bit of time over there myself. What were you doing here in Chicago? I mean, were you in the arts, as they say, while you were here, or were you in school?
I was at grad school.
Okay.
So I went to the School of the Art Institute, Chicago.
Oh, at the Art Institute?
Yeah.
Okay. No, you just dropped out. I'm sorry. I didn't hear it. All right. So growing up in, well, I mean, you kind of grew up in several places, but mostly you were in Louisville. How do you say that?
Louisville. Louisville.
I say Louisville, but, you know, some people will.
There's different ways to say it, but you just kind of had to drag it around a little bit. Louisville.
Drag it around. Okay. So, I mean, what was it like growing up there? I mean, you know, did you have a good childhood, a decent childhood? I mean, what was that? How was it for you?
I think the one thing that stood out is, I have to say, at the time, I don't know if it's probably different now, but the Jefferson County public school system was amazing. And, I mean, I majored in visual arts in high school.
Right.
And took college courses in high school. So, in terms of college prep, you know, teachers actually drove us to colleges out of state so that we could actually see what college life was like on visit schools. So anywhere from Memphis, Tennessee to St. Louis to Savannah, Georgia, and the teachers drove us. So we had a really good education that really prepared me for college. So one thing about it, and also, you know, that's when I first got into computers, when I didn't really want to, was in high school. So that kind of set the foundation. So it was a really, that's the one thing that really stands out for me. It's slow. So one thing about Louisville that's different than New York is the speed in which things happen. So people move very slowly versus people who in New York City to move too fast. So, that's not the part that I liked. The part I liked was being able to learn new things and kind of going off into my own directions. I had a lot of freedom in terms of school. So,
right
now, I visit schools, observe schools as part of my research, and I noticed that everything's kind of boxed in. There isn't, the kind of freedom that I had when I was in school.
Well, there's two reasons for that. One is, the abject fear that the media has been feeding, and I guess in some parts rightly so, in some ways rightly so, about the dangers of just being in school and serious nuts out there that are doing really awful things in schools. But I think the other thing is that, in defense of not doing as good a job or not knowing how to educate as well as maybe a generation ago, schools are making things very, very rigid and very, very unforgiving. And, when you have schools from elementary school all the way to the colleges having things like zero tolerance policies for behavior and things like that, one of the reasons why those are so popular is because they are a great means of excluding people or getting rid of undesirables that you don't want to have around.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I would, when I think about the kinds of things that, I used to be able to play. It's Kentucky, but Kentucky was not an easy place to live. We lived both in the suburbs for a little bit, and we also lived in the projects. We lived in both places. So, in the projects, we were able to play after dark.
Yeah.
And people say, well, did anything crazy happen? Yeah, there were things that happened, but there was still a community. We were still kids. And I don't think that gang violence hit Louisville, Kentucky until the year I went to college. So by the time, 12 months almost, by the time I went back to visit, I was kind of shocked at the level of gang violence that had kind of hit the city versus when I grew up. So that changed a lot. So we didn't have that when I was growing up, even when I was a teenager. It kind of came right around the time I left and went to college that it became, gang violence was some sort of became a big deal in the black neighborhood in Louisville. So
what year was that about?
Late 80s, early 90s.
Oh, okay, sure.
So early 90s, I would say that kind of happened. And, again, we witnessed and went through some crazy stuff, but it wasn't anything that hurt me per se. I would consider myself lucky in that way. Although, we have, I have stories of, walking to church on a Sunday and with my little sister, having the freedom to do that, but then also the weird white guy in the brown station wagon who wanted us to get in and promise candy, kind of story that could have easily become something else had I not been kind of street smart, Well,
yeah, and that's, I'm a tad bit older than you, but back when I was in either kindergarten or first grade when somebody in Chicago approached me the same way, and I just casually mentioned it to like a teacher because I didn't think much of it. I said, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry I'm late." And like the police showed up 2 minutes later. They put me in a squad car. They went and got my mother, and then we went all over the neighborhood looking for this guy's car. Because it was such an unusual occurrence. And nowadays, man, these guys are everywhere. So,
and that was I'm even to this day, but I was street smart then. So I kind of was able to see things, follow my gut instinct, and that kind of avoided a lot of things that even some of my peers at the time got involved in that I didn't. And part of it for me, I'm the daughter of a computer programmer on one side and a high school dropout on the other. And so just like there were these dichotomies in these kind of both worlds in my life that kind of played, had some impact on me or effect on me through school, through college, and into my own regular, comings and goings. So, having a mom who was a computer programmer in the 80s, and 90 was a black woman in Kentucky.
Yeah.
You know, and then, you know, my younger sister is a chemical engineer who went to MIT, and, you know, we, you know, were kind of that. And then I also had, you know, relatives or, you know, the life or friends who were doing the opposite of that. And so those two worlds are part of, you know, who I became or who I was and who I became. So by the time I moved to New York City, you know, or even before I moved to New York City, I was, you know, the very first thing that I remember in terms of making the change from Louisville, Kentucky to New York City was the NAACP has something called AXO, which is the I can't remember the acronym for something called Cultural, Technological, Scientific Olympics, but arts in there. So I think A for art. And so what happens is, at least at the time, is they would have statewide or regional competitions, and the winners of those competitions will go to the national and compete wherever the conference they had a conference of that year. So when I was about 15 years old, I won Kentucky's so they sent me to New York City. And it was the first, and I had already read encyclopedias and had already kind of determined that New York City was where I wanted to go. So this was like a dream trip for me. And so I went, and this is before I got into computers. I went with an art portfolio and artwork, traditional artwork, to the NAACP AXO competition in New York City. And there I met a Louisville artist, a Louisville-based artist named Houston Conwell. And Houston Conwell, he did the floor in the Schomburg in New York City. So it's a cosmogram, basically, and underneath it's Langston Hughes' ashes. So I met that artist. The fact that he was from Louisville, was African-American, kind of took me on his wing for a brief time that I was there. I was 15 years old. I got lost in Times Square on purpose. It was like a whirlwind for me. By the time I got back to Kentucky, I knew that I had to get to New York. And I didn't have any resources at all, and I didn't really have a lot of family support because they couldn't do it. And so, you know, I had a couple things to my benefit. One of them, I was in an art high school. Two, I had like a 3.8, 3.9 grade point average at the time. So there's probably a higher chance of getting some sort of scholarship or some sort of financial aid. So I wasn't it wasn't a block, you know, it was like you can't do that. It was more like I'm just going to keep trying hard and doing well in school so that I can get to New York. And the other thing that they used to have, and still have actually to this day, is National Portfolio Days. And so I had a strategy that if I went to, as a junior or sophomore, I went to a portfolio day, I could walk around and talk to college representatives and show them my portfolio, my artwork, and see whichever ones looked like they were really interested in my work, I would put them on my top 10 list. And so eventually, instead of saying I just want to go to New York, it was I want to go to Pratt Institute, or I want to go to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which I think was my number 2. Memphis College of Art was also somewhere on that list. In Atlanta, at the time, Atlanta College of Art, which is now SCAD, was there. So I had a list that I was building up, but I also, somewhere around, and this is getting more towards, you know, what became my major, around my late junior year of high school, my pottery ceramics teacher, Miss Sidebottom, she came up to me and said, I want you to take this computer graphics class. I said, no, thank you, I don't like computers. And she's like, well, you have an elective and you need to take this class. And I'm like, no, I don't need to take that class. She said, well, you need an elective. So she kept on me, and finally I signed up for this class. So when we first had this class, she's a very talented potter and ceramics teacher. And she basically started the class. She didn't have her lab yet, so we started out with a Commodore 64 and a kiln, next to the kiln, in a ceramics room. And eventually that became a lab. And then when it became a lab, the artwork that I produced in that lab was what got me a full scholarship to Pratt. So understanding that the technology or computer could be used to make art. Are you still with me?
Yeah,
Hello?
I mean, it's
Okay.
what it. Yeah, no, it's what it's like is you, instead of thinking of it as a computer, the gestalt of a computer, you just thought of it as a tool. Yeah,
Right.
I got a tool to do this. It's a much bigger pencil with a little bit more capability.
Right.
So I mean that makes perfect sense because when you look at things that way, it kind of flips your perspective and makes something that you had so much resistance about, because it really sounds like you did not want to get into computers.
Well, my mother was a programmer, and I had already determined that the kind of work I saw her do, she's putting stuff on dot matrix printers. She was programming. I saw a bunch of stuff that didn't look interesting to me at the time. So for me, it was like, okay, that's not really what I want to do. Art is what I want to do. And my teacher was like, you can make art with that tool. And I was good at it. And so when it was time to apply for college, it was so important for me to get to where I needed to get to and get out of Kentucky, because it just wasn't going. It wasn't the speed. It wasn't so much, if you like a place like Kentucky, you like it. For me, I wanted to go to a place like New York City. So it was important for me to get a scholarship, because it's the only way I would be able to go to a private art school.
Right.
Is if I got a scholarship. So my teacher devised a strategy. She said, well, and my guidance counselor said, look, there's this talent search, and they don't have this anymore. But Pratt Institute, which is in New York City, had at the time a national talent search. So you would apply and send your portfolio, and if you placed, that would determine your scholarship package. So you could also just get accepted. I'm sure they had a bunch of applications they accepted but didn't place anything, so they didn't get a big scholarship package. So we decided that I would do two portfolios, one for computer graphics and the other one for art and design. And put both portfolios in, two different applications, same person, and whichever one placed highest, that would basically choose my path.
Right.
We had determined Pratt was it. And then, of course, part two was, we would go to another school and see if we got a different, get another package of scholarship or whatever. So I did that, and then I remember that all of the kids in my program started getting their letters of acceptance, and including my best friend, and I didn't get anything from Pratt. And I had a nervous breakdown because people were getting acceptance letters from Pratt. I didn't get anything. And finally, my best friend kind of hit me over the head and said, I think you need to pay attention. If we're all getting acceptance letters to Pratt, that means you're not. That means you're going. You're in the next tier. That next level of deliberation. So you need to stop it. And so then was that. It was a rainy day. I was really depressed. Then I opened up the mailbox and light came out, and and there was
the angels started to sing, and the presents fell out of the ceiling, and
in there were multiple letters from Pratt.
Right.
So it was like Pratt at the time, and probably still does, has a what do you call it, a logo that's a yellow text on their envelopes. And so I had that first, and then there was another envelope that had the logo in black on the white envelope. So I was like, okay, maybe that's a rejection letter, or maybe this is not. So it turned out that there were four letters, and basically I had placed third in art and design, so partial scholarship, and first in computer graphics. And so that basically was it. And so I did my prices right, jumping up and down, and before long I was on my way to Pratt Institute to study computer graphics. But I have a minor, or I come in with a traditional art I came with a traditional art background, so a lot of my work. And the other thing I didn't mention, which also will played a role in my future work, is that as a kid I was really, my English teacher gave me the autobiography of Malcolm X out of the blue. It wasn't a class assignment. She said, here, read this book. And I think I was like a sophomore. And it changed everything. And I was like, I don't want to learn any more white history. I don't want to know, I don't want to learn. I want to learn where black people came from. I want to learn, so I started digging, and I found Langston Hughes, and I found the Harlem Renaissance, and I found all this stuff. By the time I was a senior, I was doing African-centered work.
Okay.
So the computer graphics portfolio, most of that work was African-centered. And that was a worry for me because I was worried that these were a bunch of white people over at Pratt, they would see this African-centered computer graphics and determine that I was not somebody they wanted to accept. And so I thought it was, but at the same time, it didn't stop me, but that was something that I find kids my age now that I was then, they don't have opportunities to do that kind of thing. And again, teachers really gave me a lot of freedom to do that. So I brought kind of this African-centered, I had mentors and things, but artwork with me to Pratt and continue along those lines. So I was learning high-end technology, but I was also using African-centered images and symbols and things like that in my work. Mm-hmm. So that was important because it was, there was, pre-Afrofuturism, most of anything, but I was, then I also had to learn programming because you actually had to do that to make things move or make, games, video games and things like that. So they kind of snuck that in there and tricked me, but I actually had to learn computer programming at Pratt.
Yeah, but all of these, when you think about the totality of that discipline, mm-hmm. Were you catching on to the fact that it was all interdependent and that it all helped, the totality of it, or were you just kind of resistant to, I know this and I don't want to do this, obviously look where you are today. All of that has come together pretty cool for you.
Yeah, and it really didn't come together the way, only recently I'm like, oh, it came full circle. Or, look at that. Or, and I would say that even when the process of learning the high-end technology and also still exploring sort of African-centered, African-American types of content, types of themes and things like that in the work was something that was natural to me because it was my natural interest, but it was also something that I didn't necessarily I had to subscribe for an application. I just applied for a summer institute, and I talked about in the application how at Pratt I was using something, now it's called Adobe Director, but at the time it was called Macromedia Director or Macromind Director. Sure. And I was using Macromedia, it's a multimedia authoring platform, and I was using that to create two-dimensional animations of like text from Langston Hughes or Zora Neale Hurston. When I was in my, an undergraduate at Pratt. So I was just, kind of taking it to the next level for what I was doing in high school.
Sure.
So then that was Pratt, and then I decided to submit a non-traditional portfolio to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which had an art and technology studies program, which they still do. And I figured I needed to do more, and something else needed to happen because I wasn't there yet by the time I was done with Pratt. So I submitted it, I think, to CalArts, and it was the wrong fit.
Okay.
And then they got accepted to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and they also gave me a full ride, thanks to Philip Morris and all the smokers out there, because Philip Morris had a Artists of Color Fellowship, and they matched. Well, they paid half, and then the school paid the other half. So
well, they have to look good somehow, with all the damage they do. They need all the good pub they can get.
Yeah, and I think the Philip Morris Fellowship program came out of the Artists of Color Fellowship, came out of Maryland Institute of Art. I think their school, the equivalent of Chicago, SCIFI and MICA in in Maryland. Actually, was the school that started it with Philip Morris, but it became national by the time I applied. So I didn't apply for that fellowship. They just kind of gave it to me. And one thing that was interesting about that was I got the fellowship. I went to Chicago and totally did something totally different. Then it took me to another direction I didn't even anticipate, because I had laid some seeds in New York. And one of those seeds was working with communities. So I worked in, Lower East Side, Far Walkaway. And what I was doing was I was teaching art classes, but very slowly, from teaching art and making murals and things like that, I started talking about a dream that I wanted to build a lab in a housing development and run computer graphics classes for young people so that they could get really excited by computer graphics the way I had been. And that's what happened. I mean, I laid that seed and I went to school, and then somebody in New York got some funding, and I, did both. I did a thesis exhibition, and then I built a computer lab in Jamaica, Queens. And that was part of my studies. So that took me into community work, as opposed to just, making art and doing exhibitions and things like that. So that's another, piece of the thing that came together recently in my work. And so after that, I tried to get back and get a PhD program. I tried to jump into NYU right away. I was too young, and not the right time. So I worked in communities for a long time, just building labs and running educational programs and teaching kids and teaching adults. And, finally, realizing at the back of my mind, I never gave up on the dream of getting a PhD. But it also took me away from doing the community work all day, 9 to 5. It took me away from the creativity, the production, the art making. I mean, I make art on the side, but it really kept me from doing that for a long time. I had to squeeze it in. It wasn't something that I was free to do the way I had been in school. So yeah, I don't know if that gives you an idea, but that's kind of the first, half of my life.
It's kind of funny because your life and mine are very similar in that respect, because I design, build, and maintain computer learning centers for underserved communities here in Chicago, on the south side and the west side. And had I known that you were out there wanting to put together art programs did you want to do that as well while you were in Chicago, or just when you went back to New York? Because obviously I missed an opportunity.
I actually pitched the same idea that I pitched to the folks at Jamaica Art Center in Queens, New York. I pitched to Boulevard Art Center, and they just didn't have the resources, and they didn't have the space. I mean, it's in Inglewood. There's no, they had break-ins and things like that. I mean, I lived upstairs, no lock on my door, but I was teaching art, and New York. So New York, I was through the 90s in New York. Through the 90s, actually through the 90s in New York, and then moved to Boston after in 2000. But and then 2 years in Chicago. The other, what was interesting we were talking about, I wrote a blog piece for a project called the Good Men Project. And it was around the time, it was about 6 months ago, a few months ago, but it was around the time when I first wrote about it. I wrote about it on my blog, and it was in response to my feelings about Trayvon Martin. And, this idea of thug. And and the story that I wrote came out of Chicago when I was a grad student. And I don't know if they still have the L's running the way they used to in the mid-90s. But I used to take the L from Inglewood to school and back, sometimes late at night. And, I really felt like, I'm working with kids. I'm teaching kids in Inglewood and in Chicago, and There was a lot of gang violence and a lot of stuff going on, and yet art was something that kept them involved.
Mhm.
And so I think that all that stuff, the South Jamaica Queens, the Chicago, all that stuff I carry with me. So fast forward to recently, these kind of ideas were, although I was doing a lot of community work, these kind of ideas, the African-centered aesthetics of the work I was doing from high school through grad school, the community work, working with kids who were labeled, quote-unquote, at risk for prison or other things.
Right.
The technology and the changing technology, that part is important because, the systems we used in high school were different systems we used in Chicago, were different systems that I used later on. Of course, they kept getting, upgraded and different computers. I was using PCs. I was using Macs. I used the first version of Adobe Premiere, and it's, come a long way since then in terms of nonlinear editing. When DVD authoring became something that was more prosumer, professional consumer, I was authoring my own DVDs, and teaching others how to do that. The idea of just moving through these technologies, but the technology wasn't the focus. It was what we did with the technologies that mattered. So I really just kept learning new technologies, learning new software. The foundation that had been laid meant, that I was, jumping from different programming languages and able to do that. So my mother's influence was there, even though I claimed to hate it. Computer programming was just there, So I just, took a break for a while and I taught other people how to do that. And eventually found my way in 2006 to Second Life.
Mhm.
And Second Life at the time was just brand new, I think it was a year old or less, and it's a virtual 3D world that you could just go in and you just download the player, the client, and just go in there and see stuff. But
Sure.
I didn't go in there to make art. I went in there to teach because I went to an educational conference in Second Life and realized this is a good conference environment. Everyone's avatars and you can make up stuff and show things on, objects and teach people things. So I actually taught some classes in Second Life up until like 2000, for the next 4 years, actually 3 or 4 years. I taught creativity in Second Life. So I started, around the time I taught creativity in Second Life at the Mass College of Art and Design, I was actually also learning how to make stuff my own, learning my own creativity in Second Life.
Right.
But it wasn't anything. It wasn't really coming together at the time. It's more of an educational tool than anything, and something that I was doing that was sort of a supplement or sort of a enhancement of what I was doing in my regular 9 to 5, and so that was kind of where I got to, somewhere around there between 2007, 2008. Someone floated the idea of Afrofuturism in my head. And I think it was a online forum, and somebody had talked about it. I know the author was Alondra Nelson. And it was an essay she wrote, and I forget, I have it, but I can't remember what the publication was. And Alondra Nelson's, it was the introduction to Afrofuturism. And it really kind of, it was something interesting to me because I was into science fiction too, and I was reading a lot.
Sure.
I read a lot as a young person, but I continued to read. And what was interesting is around the time that I read that essay, I was in Second Life, and suddenly I realized you could also create objects and embed video into them. And that's kind of changed things. So instead of teaching in Second Life, I said, I'm going to do art exhibition stuff in Second Life. What if we had a gallery, like a physical gallery, have artwork up, and then put up a kiosk with a computer, with a camera, and then stream the video from the gallery maybe it's a performance, into Second Life, then people who show up as avatars in Second Life can see the live stream. They can interact. Maybe people in the gallery can go in as avatars and interact with people. So this is live, this mixed reality experience.
Mhm.
And when I learned how to do that, and at the time, Linden Lab, which was the company that owned Second Life and still probably does, I guess, whatever form it is now, 'cause it's different. They had Linden Lab had an educational office, had a headquarters in Boston, and so I kind of became friends in real life with John Lester, who was Pathfinder Linden. What was also weird about, it's like Apple has a company, Google has a company. Second Life, all the employees that were involved with Second Life had the same last name in Second Life, Linden, Linden Lab. So Pathfinder Linden was a technical support for me and kind of showed me the ropes, and basically I learned how to do mixed reality. So we could have art exhibitions, and then I started going to art exhibitions solely in Second Life. And artists were doing amazing things in Second Life in terms of their own art. And I, whether it was performance, live performance, or they were using algorithms to do sculpture, that kind of stuff, it was really intense and some beautiful work. And so I pitched the idea of writing about this because I felt like this is really almost kind of like traditional art, but art, like where art is going in physical world, but it's happening in virtual world. So I pitched to R21, who makes the TV series R21 for PBS. I said, well, you have a blog up. How about I do a series about this artwork in Second Life? And they said, that's a great idea. We have this kind of creating the social web, R21, R2.1. So how about you write for that? So in 2009, I wrote about, they have an artist named Cal Fei, she's an architect from China who was doing stuff in Second Life. And so it was like a way to connect the audience for the TV show to what Cal Fei was talking about in her work, to actual other artists who were doing that stuff. And it was huge. There was a huge response. It brought two communities together. R21 was like, oh, this is big. We didn't realize that people were really interested. There was this movement in Second Life around art. And so it kind of got me a gig as a columnist writer for R21 in 2009. It just kept writing about, art in Second Life. And as I was writing and going to exhibitions, I continued to teach a little bit, and then I started making art in Second Life on my own. And that's where it began to shift. And so when I teach classes now and students see the work that I've done in Second Life, they're always blown away, and they think I did this in a year. But that was 2006 to 2010 when I actually did my own exhibition. So that's 4 years of just immersion in virtual space, being an avatar in virtual space, building things in virtual space, learning how to add textures to objects. Some of those textures could be video. Some of those textures could have animation on it or be and so by the time I got around to pitching my idea to do an Afrofuturist exhibition in Second Life, I had learned to take Askamabata and Soulsonic Forces Planet Rock video and put it on the object. So when you go in there, you just watch it.
Okay.
So it was actually a feed from YouTube to that object. So you could just be an avatar watching Planet Rock or Parliament Funkadelic while you're sitting as an avatar in Second Life.
And so while you're doing, go ahead. No, go. Well, I was thinking, while you were doing all of this, because a lot of what you do is basically community outreach. Were you still, or were you including these kinds of things in your community outreach, or was this separate from what you were doing?
At some point, I stopped. I continued to teach a little here and there, but at some point, I was by myself, avatar, exploring how to do stuff in Second Life on my own. So I stopped. I was still going to art exhibitions in Second Life. I was still writing about it, but I also started doing my own experiments in Second Life, what can I do? Can I bring in Africa Bambaataa? Can I, okay, so I can bring in Parliament Funkadelic. What can I remake the album cover for Cosmic Slop as a virtual three-dimensional mothership? So what can I do to create a sculpture that basically is the cover of Cosmic Slop? And this wasn't something I was sharing with anybody. This was just something that I was doing. What can I do if I created a gallery space? Then I can do a timeline of you know, starting from Sun Ra to Parliament Funkadelic to, you know, Outcast, and put this in like a gallery space. Put some fog coming up out, you know, and when you can create an object in Second Life and attach a script that sends out particles, and those particles can be fog. So, you know, you have some fog coming out here. You got a spaceship or some sort of planet that rotates. So now I'm learning how to script, because you have to add scripts to objects in order for them to move or to show things. So now I'm back to scripting again. And so I'm scripting objects, I'm texturing objects, I'm making a timeline of Afrofuturism. I think the first time I made was an art and activism timeline, and then this became a gallery timeline. And so at that point, I felt like I'm ready to pitch my idea and get some support, because you can have land and you can build a house, but everything costs money once you start building things, because you can build stuff on someone else's land in Second Life, parcel, and they can kick you off. They're like, okay, we'll give you a week. Okay, next person. So there's sandboxes in Second Life, and you know, so you're a visitor. So once they pull back the welcome mat, you got to go somewhere else. So I had to invest, and I worked with a professor at Mass College of Arts, who's like my mom's age, who was so into Second Life because she's an installation artist. Sharon Haggins Dunn, whose father is actually Malcolm X's personal photographer, started putting some of her father's images, photographs in Second Life. So we were both like really heavy into Second Life, and so she had more money than me, or she had more resources, so she would have space. Eventually, I had my little space, but you need lots. The spaces that you buy, you can only use so many objects, so you were limited to how many objects you could use before you ran out. Like you could stop. At some point, you had to stop. You were limited.
Well, wait.
So
are you saying that essentially? Okay, so if you have X amount of space, you know, the objects you can have are X times whatever that fixed number is. But if you get larger and larger spaces, you can get more objects to populate your space. And wait, let's back up a little bit. Why don't you explain to people how you accumulated, you know, whatever wealth you had in Second Life in order to do the things that you wanted to do?
Well, there are some people. I mean, everyone is either.
No, we're not talking about some people. We're talking about you.
No, but I wanted to make a difference that there are people who make Second Life a business. There are people who make costumes in Second Life that you buy.
Yeah,
like real money.
I've seen that. Sure.
Right. And or art. You know, there are people that sell their own artwork. You know, like their physical artwork in Second Life. You click the object, and then it ships to you in the mail. Or T-shirts and things like that. But then for me, I was just kind of playing around. So I could if I had, 200 objects I could build on, I would do a thing and then I put it away in my folder, my inventory, and then do another thing. But I was limited. Again, my ideas were kind of limited within a box. Okay. And so what happened was IBM, like the IBM, they decided we want to get into Dell Computer got into Second Life, IBM, all these companies were jumping into Second Life because they were like, oh, look, a new platform for making money. And what they found is it's very hard it's not like the web. You can't create a website in Second Life. So they were experimenting with that, and so was IBM. And there's a guy named Andrew St-Pierre who decided to take on, he's an artist, and said, let's take on artists in Second Life, and let's give artists land. so what they would do is if they had a sandbox. So sandbox, again, is you go there and, you know, you get 2 weeks. Your 2 weeks are up, you got to put your stuff away, and somebody else gets
Sure.
it.
Sure.
But they also started having entire simulations, like entire world, like an island, where you had unlimited ability to build. So unlimited, as many objects as you wanted.
Sure.
And so they put calls out for artists to submit proposals. And I submitted a proposal in 2010 in the spring and said I wanted to do Afrofuturistic culture production. Because nobody ever did that before, and I want to do that. And
right.
It just turns out that Andrew was into Afrofuturism. So I got an entire island. So now, you know, right, so islands are, $1,500, it's a lot of money.
Sure. Yeah,
and so never, they give you a month, 2 months. In this case, it turned out to be around 3.5 months that they, gave me extra time. Like, IBM thought it was so cool that I did Afrofuturism in Second Life, so it gave me extra time. But one thing that people said when they went, eventually, I guess they gave me the keys, so to speak, in, May for an opening in early June.
Okay. Around
that time, I got accepted into Georgia Tech, the digital media program for PhD. So I knew I was packing up and had to go, but I also knew I had this show. And so probably the show would end as I started school. So I went crazy. And everything that I had already sketched out in my head, I said, well, I'm going to go crazy in this island space and build as much as I can. I'm just going to go nuts. And so I came up with a plan to create a blueprint, like a social dichotomy in terms of Afrofuturism.
Okay.
And you have on one side this utopia and then dystopia. And in utopia, there would be Miles Davis' Bitches Brew and DNA things. And then on the other side would be the cradle to prison pipeline and surveillance, NSA kind of stuff. And so you had these two. And then I had this kind of sky bridge idea where you just kind of walk a timeline. And, again, a timeline that I had done before, but said this timeline will give you an overview, so some of the early stuff I was doing, and then walk you through from kind of the African-American, sort of. You walk kind of like steampunk and take a trip through a time machine, through slavery, through and beyond and above slavery is, going back to sort of the highlights of African history, particularly Egyptian history, and then the planets. Then you're in the universe. And so I was able to just keep building. And so I really, all the Afrocentric stuff from high school and Pratt and all that stuff, and all the kind of, things I had learned in 3D modeling and all the things I learned in programming, I had just went to town. So by the time I had an opening in Second Life, people who had gone to shows in IBM's exhibition space were used to people collaborating to create huge installations, were saying, I can't believe one person did that. You didn't have help?
Like you had help or
I never had any help.
No, but I'm saying their accusation was that, somehow you were secretly collaborating with some Second Life fairies to make your stuff happen?
They were shocked that
okay.
They knew me. A lot of these people knew me as the person who comes to exhibitions and writes it up for R21 very eloquently and well done. But we didn't know she was an artist.
Well, I guess you showed them, didn't you?
Well, and so the artist, it was great. The artists that I covered for R21 came to the opening for that exhibition and were blown away.
Okay.
And then some of them, because the topics of some of them were political, and a lot of them like social dichotomies and utopia and dystopia, and I had a whole things around Octavia Butler's Parables of the Sower, Earthsea Station. We could go in one place where you could actually go and they could, like a sandbox for people to play around. But I had control of all that for 3 months. And, you know, I just kept building through the whole thing. I never stopped. But, for example, in the dystopia side, around the Cradle to Prison pipeline, when you go in, there would be a series of cages. And then there's also like this kind of bombed out Bronx, back in the 80s, kind of 70s kind of thing in the Bronx. And then and a little information placard about the Cradle to Prison pipeline for people who didn't know what it was. And then I scripted the floor so that, you know, this, one of the things that, you know, in terms of the Black experience as it relates to being in, you know, in poverty-stricken areas is that you really don't have any options. And the real only options you have is entertainment and athletics. So I threw a bunch of, like, sports, you know, balls in there you could throw around, basketballs, footballs, or whatever. And then I also had cages, that, like mini prisons in there. And then I also put some money in there. So what will happen was if you went and stepped on a certain, well, actually, when the first time around when you went in and you try to get the money, it will put you in prison.
Okay.
And I really wanted them to understand that sometimes, like drug dealing, you go for the money, and in the end, you lose the money and you're in prison. Like the lure of the dollar bill, the Benjamin Franklin. Now made it right, nice and prominent so you could see it. And then you go for it, you touch it, you try to grab it, take it with you, and you get put into this prison. And of course, like inside you could see you could get out, or you could teleport out. But my advisor, my current faculty advisor, who visited at the time, she wasn't my faculty advisor. She said you should really sometimes you know if you think about Trayvon Martin or some of this, or Jordan Allen or some of the things that are happening today, you don't really there isn't a dollar bill. You just step somewhere and gone. The wrong place at the wrong time.
Right.
So
right.
She's like, why don't you script one of the floor tiles so if somebody steps on it, they go to prison. So that's exactly what happened. You just go in, you wander around, and you see all these cool things to look at, and if you step in the wrong place, you put in prison.
Isn't that a little harsh?
Well, that's kind of, you know, it was, you know, you wander around in the neighborhood, in the hood, you went in the wrong place at the wrong time. Next thing you know, racial profiling, you get put in jail. Or you get handcuffed.
Yeah, I just want to mention this. I was listening to the radio today while I was driving around, and actually a white comedian, John Fugelsang, said this. He said that, and this is the only reason why I'm mentioning this because you mentioned Trayvon Martin. He said that basically stand your ground is a law that was written for when you start a fight and you're getting your ass kicked, you get to shoot the person who's, you know, and the absurdity of it. I mean, just not only the absurdity of it, but the devastating destruction that it allows people to visit on other people with practically impunity, especially if the person who got killed was black, because, you know, obviously there's no prosecution there at all because Stand Your Ground was designed so that whites could kill blacks essentially with impunity. Yeah, I said it. Somebody had to say it. So, I mean, but still, I mean, wandering around your house and then finding myself in prison, I don't know, Nettrice. I just...
Well, remember, this is not as in a video game. You could actually kill off the actual character, the player, and you can't really kill off avatars in Second Life. All I'm trying to do is kind of for people who have never heard of Cradle to Prison, New Jim Crow, or profiling people from Canada, because there were people like, what does this mean? Why is this going on? I don't understand. I actually I wanted to simulate the idea of it, not necessarily put the real person in that situation.
No, I know. You were basically providing a cross-cultural experience for these people.
Right. And so that was, go ahead.
And how was it received?
People, and I'm going to say white folks, but you don't know because it's online. Well, let me explain the other piece, and then I'll go back to that. The second part of that is about surveillance. And it was a wall of eyeballs. And as your avatar approaches the wall of eyeballs, they follow you like cameras.
Uh-huh.
So I actually scripted the eye objects to follow avatar, all of them at the same time. So it's creepy. You walk up to these eyes, and they're all following you. And so and then you go into the space, and it talks about Panopticon and, Jeremy Benson's Panopticon, the Big Brother, prisons. But also, I also had a Twitter feed in terms of monitoring other people's Twitter feeds, feeding into a object in real time so you could see what people are doing on Twitter. This idea, everywhere you go, you're watched, you're monitored, that kind of thing.
Well, I mean, but see, for black folks, that's not of much utility. I mean, all we have to do is go into a certain department store, and that's exactly what happens. They follow us around.
And so these things were attempting to, again, on the dystopia side, attempting to put people who may or may not have been in those situations of simulation.
Sure.
And so one of the artists, amazing artist, Breno, she's Canadian, and also I believe not African or black in any way, and had never experienced some of these things. And so she needed a lot of description of what was happening, because she was curious, and she was really, a lot of people were drawn to the dystopia side.
Okay.
Like, I remember my faculty advisor now, who at the time was just somebody that had accepted me into the program. I knew they were there because they kept throwing the balls out of the bounds, and I kept getting alerts. And I'm like, who the hell's over there throwing balls out of throwing my objects off the land? And it turned out to be my faculty advisor. Playing around. But they were really drawn to that because, again, I think, unless you experience it, and you can't, again, being an avatar, a three-dimensional avatar in a virtual space is not the same as being Trayvon Martin being followed by George Zimmerman and, with the Skittles and soda. It's not the same. But it is a simulation and attempting to at least create a dialogue or create some kind of experience in you as an avatar. Because, you can leap off a cliff in Second Life and feel like, oh, my God, I'm leaping somewhere, and you're not. So it is a way to create a feeling of creepiness, of being followed, always being looked at, without talking about race specifically. That I thought was important in terms of this idea of Afrofuturism, because there's the thing we live in the present, there's also the things in the past, slavery thing, and the steampunk travel thing, and then there's the future, which is the utopia side. So, and so explaining the dystopia side, or letting people experience it first, and then kind of being around to answer questions, was the goal of having the show. And IBM was great because Andrew St. Pierre showed up and they had an opening. It was advertised as an opening, be here at this time. People would show up, Andrew would greet them in. They would then go into, and then I would be around, explaining things.
Right. Oh, sure.
So utopia was the opposite. And the idea of utopia is the future. That's the futurism. Or the dystopia is the futurism, depending on how you look at it. And I said, well, what kinds of things am I thinking about in terms of futurism? And so I had to think about, so I had two installations on the other side. One of them around this idea of tracing idea of the body, the black body, in terms of not so much as being watched, but as the idea of being able to connect to our higher spiritual natures and selves, and then also this idea of connecting to the continental Africa. And so through DNA, and I actually talked to a scientist about how to build a double helix tower. That was an actual installation so that we could do that. And then I brought in, and I'll talk about it in a minute, but I brought in like animations. The floor moves like water. I put the album cover from Miles Davis's Bitches Brew, and you could actually click on it and play the video, or play the music for Bitches Brew. Something about the song and just being in that space helped me build that installation. The next one was about binary numerals and African fractals and the Dogon, and it was like really just out this idea that we're not from the physical. In the physical, we're here, but we're also in the spiritual, also in this kind of futuristic mode. And what happens if you simulate that for somebody? How do you simulate that versus how you simulate prison? And so these are challenges. And I don't think I was that successful with. Well, I liked the one with the Miles Davis Bitches Brew one, which was more like this idea of us in the future, a man and woman intertwined, dancing, lots of, DNA and, just positive stuff in there. But the other one was,
No, I was agreeing. I mean, having that kind of imagery and having that broad spectrum of imagery is more than art. There's an essence to it too. Hang on a second. You're listening to the Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show, a service of the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website. This is our Valentine's Day 2014 edition, and we're talking to Nettrice Gaskins, who is currently experiencing some bad weather down in Atlanta, but nothing like the people over on the eastern seaboard or those of us in the upper Midwest. I do have a question about, about what, obviously you accomplished a lot in Second Life. And I'm wondering just how connected to it and how involved are you in it now? Because you started back way back when it was fairly early. Yeah, when it was fairly new. And has it managed to retain your interest after all of this time? Are you No,
it jumped a shark 2 years ago.
Oh, so we just did an hour on the show about something you don't even do anymore.
It jumped the shark. But I will say...
What happened?
Well, one thing I noticed, and I'm really good at seeing the handwriting on the wall.
Okay.
The very first thing that happened is they closed down the office of the folks who were by tech support at Linden Lab in Boston and left my man without a job. And I thought he was amazing. So I'm like, why did he do that? He's like the evangelist for Second Life. Why did they get rid of him?
Right.
And so that was like the first sign. And then I moved to Atlanta and started school. They started losing my credit card information, and I couldn't log in. And
they would just lose it? I mean, all of a sudden your account was just...
Yeah, just randomly.
They couldn't... Okay, all right. So the accounting was going to hell.
Yeah, and then I was like, that's 2. And usually I don't get to 3. So that's 2. And then I hung out, and what I did between 2010 and 2012 is I did one more thing, and I went into more closer to what I'm researching now. It was, I moved from I had a big show, closed in 3 months in like late July or early August. They shut that down. And then the IBM exhibition space in Second Life was shut down. IBM was like, okay, we're not going to make any money here. We're out. And so I was like the next to the last exhibition ever for IBM. Yeah. I think one other artist, maybe 2 other artists came through, and then by the time the winter of 2010 hit, IBM was gone from Second Life. Mm-hmm. But that wasn't, it happened. But so Linden Lab decided to create an art. They decided to step in where IBM stepped out, and they created the Linden Endowment for the Arts, LEA. Yeah. And so they started taking proposals and artists who could come and do installations. And there was a whole committee and all this stuff. And then it's like, okay, it's too organized. I don't care. I did one last exhibition, and it was really, how do you take graffiti? So now I'm into graffiti, going back to my roots. I want to make 3-dimensional graffiti, following the same kind of rules, but in 3 dimensions. So I did that, and that was kind of my last hurrah in Second Life, because around the time I was really just kind of kicking around that whole idea, then they got rid of my land. I went in one day and I was locked out in my land. Objects were returned. I'm like, so they claimed they had lost my information again. I said, you know something? I sent them a note. I said, you know something? I wrote about Second Life for R21. I brought all these people who had never heard of Second Life to Second Life. You guys are wrong for that.
Right.
And I never went back. And people were like,
well, here we are.
Well, you know, it's funny because people were saying, well, you should think, you know, you should get over it, stop holding grudges. I'm like, I'm not holding grudges. Something's wrong with that company. And sure enough, nobody's in Second Life anymore. So someone had just asked about OpenSim. OpenSim kicked up as was already kind of kicking around, but people put more invested more time in it when Second Life started messing with everybody.
Right.
So even the artists who were like the artists in Second Life, Breno and a couple others, artists who were doing amazing stuff, Second Life started messing with them. And all these blog posts would pop up, and people were like, what is wrong? Why does Second Life hate us? You know? And I was like, I saw that back in 2010. I was out. So around 2012, that was it. People asked me, oh, when's the last time you were in Second Life? I actually went back. And this is a side note, but it's sort of related to R21. One of the artists that I interviewed for R21 is the daughter of one of the founders of the Fluxus movement in the 60s.
Okay.
People know what Fluxus is. Fluxus were happenings. You know, they would do happenings all over New York, and art scene, and I don't know, take the clothes, like, you know, take the clothes off or do things, beatboxes with belts, you know.
I just called that being a slut for me, but that was me, you know, not for everybody else.
Fluxus was kind of, you didn't want to have too many rules, but you also had,
I know.
You know. So she came out of that world, and she also was one of Andy Warhol's muses in the 60s.
Right.
When she was 16. And she's the mother of the musician Beck.
Oh, okay.
Bebe Hansen, and I interviewed her, and she was doing performances in Second Life. She would do performances. Her father, she did a performance called Car Bebe in Second Life, and she did it because her father couldn't do it in real life because it was illegal. It had to do with bombs and TNT. So she did it in Second Life as a tribute to her dad. So I became friends with Bebe, and somehow that all kind of, you know, continues today, too, in some way. So I went back into Second Life as a different avatar and a different account because I wanted to meet Bibby. And actually she was a guest speaker in one of my classes I taught. So that was the last time I went in.
Okay.
So I know.
Go ahead.
I had a question.
Well, it's not a question. One of the reasons why, here's what everybody thought when Second Life came on. Everybody thought that Second Life was going to be the embodiment of Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash. Are you familiar with that one?
Yes.
Yeah. Everybody assumed that Second Life was going to evolve into that, and what happened was, you know, the people who developed and owned Second Life found out how incredibly expensive it would be to try to realize that in real life. Okay, so they're looking at a huge amount of capitalization in order to achieve what they wanted to achieve, and you had the Fortune 1500 in there, establishing shows, showrooms, establishing stores and putting together retail outlets inside Second Life because they were assuming that the evolution of Second Life was going to be the actual online cyber world that everybody had been waiting for. Okay, and it didn't happen, and not because of any one thing, but just because part of it is there's, you know, here in America there's not enough bandwidth. Here in America we have got the crappiest high-speed digital system in the entire world. I mean, it's horrible. You go to South Korea and you could watch, you know, 13 different YouTube videos all at one time on your laptop. And people just have no idea how primitive things are here, and that's because the telco companies have such a tight hold on everything. So, I mean, there's a whole lot of reasons why, it wasn't realized. But the thing that we find time and time again is that a lot of very, very creative people in the digital world are not very good at managing their customer relationships. Okay, had you not shown up one day and somebody had deflated your island or stolen it or locked you out of it or any of the myriad of things that you would have felt, you might still be there today.
Absolutely.
But the fact of the matter is, none of this works out completely the way everybody thinks it will.
Right, and even Virtual Harlem, which is Brian Carter at, I forget the university, but Virtual Harlem was one of those early things I checked out. So,
right.
Trying to recreate Harlem. He's in OpenSim now. He's not in Second Life at all. They're in Second Life. They're not in Second Life at all. They're in OpenSim. They're gone. So when I said, I saw that, I think, earlier today. I saw a blog post about it. I said, see, it wasn't just me. Everybody was like a mass exodus when they realized these people aren't about maintaining community.
Well, yeah, but you're going to find that all the time, and here's the reason why. Every time somebody creates something, this is going to happen with OpenSim. This is going to happen with everything that you see for a long time until people are over the obsession with trying to commoditize every damn thing that has to do with the Internet. Okay, as long as people are sitting around there going, let's get people to sign up. Let's get them to have their whole family sign up. Let's get them to get used to it. And then we're going to start charging, or then we're going to start jamming advertising down their throats. And the fact of the matter is people, well, look what happened to, what was that thing called? Oh, yeah, MySpace.
Yeah.
Exactly. Look at how fickle the American public is, because, or actually, this sort of thing is a worldwide phenomenon. So when you have an online community, you're going to find out that online community is only as good as the next thing.
Exactly.
And when your online community becomes very popular, and then all of a sudden a conglomerate wants to purchase it because they see, dollar signs flashing before their eyes, the moment that thing gets purchased, that's pretty much the kiss of death.
Right.
So
because these services are mostly free to go and visit, free in terms of access, as long as you have internet,
right.
of course. This is, I'll come back to that because I want to talk about a different technology, because when I said, okay, I'm done with Second Life. But I was also done with Second Life because I got into a new technology. And the new technology I got into was augmented reality. Do you know what that is?
Yes. No, I don't, because I don't I don't keep up with those things because they do gravitate from and I don't get out much.
Well, let me explain because
yeah, please do. Tell everybody.
Because OpenSim, someone asked about that. OpenSim was just an alternative to Second Life. It's a virtual world.
Right.
Open, meaning that people are developing it still, and it's not a company, like open source technology where the community of people are creating it.
There was less of a financial ownership of the idea, right?
Not Linden Labs anymore. It's all these people who are contributing to this. So that was developed. It's been developed for the last 5-6 years. So it's been around. And open source technology is basically it's an entire community of people who develop technology platforms for new applications and new software. Without being proprietary. So it's not an Adobe. It's not a Linden Lab. It's not, it's not
Microsoft.
Right. It's basically you get in there and you start developing. You're part of the community, but you got to share with everybody else, and there's rules, but it's not proprietary.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a whole do-it-yourself open source movement that OpenSim kind of fits in. So it's the do-it-yourself open source community virtual world. It's OpenSim.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't burn myself out with the Afrofuturists, but I did everything I could possibly do in Second Life.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote about it. I taught classes in it. and I did an art show sponsored by IBM. So I started learning in 2011. I realized that there was this new augmented reality has been around for a while. Mobile augmented reality with mobile devices has only been around since like 2009. And really only recently, and still being developed. So it's kind of an emerging technology still. Google Glass is not augmented reality. It's something else. So Google Glass doesn't really, it kind of is in the general vicinity of augmented reality, but basically with augmentation, you're layering, you're adding to something that already exists. So augmented reality, like virtual reality and all these other mixed reality, in this case, if you have a poster or an image or a mural and you point your mobile device at it, you're going to see, if it's an augmented reality channel, you'll see content that the imagery triggers. So you point it at a mural and you point your mobile device at it, that image triggers something in your application, in your software that you would then see, get digital information for, or it could be video, or it could be sound.
Sure.
So, and because Georgia Tech has its own augmented reality channel or platform, I was able to play around with it, different than Linden Lab. Again, kind of an open source version of augmented reality. And there's, of course, proprietary types of augmented reality. But basically the technology is the same in the sense that you have a channel, and on that channel you have digital content, and something like a poster or something or a button or something in the physical world triggers it, and you point your device at it. And
the closest analog that people have right now is, when they're in the train, the bus, walking around the street, when they see a QR code, if they point their phone at it and zap it, then their phone is taken to a place, normally on the internet, that gives you more information or tries to sell you something.
Right. So you have a QR code that's embedded into a poster. You have a software on your mobile phone. That mobile phone scans it and then takes you online to the website. Right. In this case, it's not a code. It's just the image itself, and not a code.
Well,
it can also be a code, but it can be like a little marker, like a QR code, or it can be an actual painting that you paint, at home or something. And that if you paint it a certain way, it triggers information, and you don't necessarily need to you still need to kind of scan the image, but it then gives you information over top of it. So you're looking at the image, and you're looking at what the phone shows you, your camera shows you on your mobile device. So that was something that I got into because they were, because now I'm in school, and they had an augmented environments lab, and I just said, let me just do a new research project. And so we started working with a school of ninth graders in Oakwood, Georgia, and around world civilizations and world heritage, cultural heritage. And so they were doing mural making, and we did it as an augmented reality project where you point your mobile device, and it gives you whatever digital content those kids created when you point your device at it. So we got that down, got an A in the class. And one of the things that I did do that was cool for me, is I wanted to sort of say goodbye to Second Life by creating an augmented virtual 3D, like virtual room. So it's as if you were an avatar, but you're looking at your iPad.
Okay.
So I basically created within Second Life, took a bunch of photos, like a virtual room, virtual technology in a row, and then stitched them all together so that when you're looking, it's still using the augmented reality channel, but you're still also seeing what you would see if you were an avatar in Second Life. And that was an experiment I did. I said, okay, bye-bye Second Life. Now I'm doing augmented reality. So, and the real other cool thing about Linden Lab has its scripting language. If you're doing a website, HTML, JavaScript, CSS, cultural, cascading style sheets, there are all these things you need to know. Augmented reality, proprietary software has its own ways. Open source augmented reality is just HTML with a little bit of something called KML, which is what Google Earth basically is. the language that Google Earth do this. So it's like allowing you to be in a location with your mobile device and see content on the floor, on the ground, or something. So once you learn that, then I realized that if kids are learning how to do websites with HTML, we can teach them how to do augmented reality, learning HTML or JavaScript. So that wasn't a huge leap. You know, they're still learning the skill they can use, and they're using a different technology. So we did a mural in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and it was a visiting artist residency. It was really cool. They paid for us to come out to Albuquerque, me and my partner, Lori Marion, another grad student, and we lived in somebody else's house for 3 weeks. And but he vacated, and we just lived in that house. And then we did this. We worked with a bunch of kids at a science center called Explora, and there's a bunch of kids who are indigenous or Native American / Hispanic, Latino. And I said, this should be about their culture. This shouldn't be about, because it's kind of a takeoff of the cultural stuff we did in Oakland, Georgia. But these kids are local to the area. So let's find some culture stuff from the area, and let's do some cool stuff around that. So because the ancient designs, cultural designs of that area is Mimbres, M-I-M-B-R-E-S. Thousands of years ago, the Mimbres people lived. They made these pottery designs, and pottery crafts, and things like that. That was really amazing. And most of those kids didn't know anything about it. And it's right because they're local, meaning generations upon generations are from that area. There's, these ancient peoples kind of disappeared, so it's very possible that this was their ancestors' work. So one of the things that relates to Afrofuturism is one of the pottery designs, at least one of the ones that I've researched, is a design, and they know the symbol of the rabbit means moon. Basically, the ancient Mimbres were able to document the formation of the Crab Nebula.
Okay.
The 1300s, something like that. So there's a pottery, there's a piece of ceramics with a design on it that documents the formation of the Crab Nebula. So they were documenting astronomical, events. Phenomenon
back then, yes.
Back then. The way we think about the Dogon and the Nomo, and this was like blowing my mind. I was like, oh, now we got some different type of futurism going on, the Mimbres futurism. And then I realized that they could simulate so this is important. What I was bringing to these kids and to this project was not just the mobile augmented reality. So that was the end game. The end part of that project was to be able to point your mobile device to the mural and get content. But first, it's a learning opportunity for them to learn, one, about their culture, one, about this culture, two, about the math and science in those ancient pottery designs.
Right.
And then we had a software program that allowed them to recreate or simulate the math from the pottery designs to create their own design. So they had a week of research.
Was this like a drawing app? Was this like a drawing application?
No, this is a math and art application.
Ron,
I don't know if you do. You know?
No, but
Ron,
I'm
sorry. Go ahead.
I was wondering, what was the medium of translation of the math into a visual image? One of the things that I had. Let me backtrack a little bit because I think it'll help jump into that. Okay.
When I was doing the graffiti stuff, I noticed that a lot of graffiti artists started talking about math and science and kinetics.
Okay.
And I said, well, these people are not scientists and they're not mathematicians, but they're talking math concepts. So there's got to be a connection between graffiti and math. And I went to a faculty member at Georgia Tech who said, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Stay in your lane.
Okay.
And I was all dejected and sad. And my advisor said, no, she just doesn't understand what you're talking about. So you have to find somebody who knows what the hell you're talking about, who is respected in the field in academia. So
Right.
I remember a contemporary artist named Colleen Smith, she's an Afrofuturist. She does a lot of film work around Sun Ra, had told me about a mathematician named Ron Eglash, Eglash. He has a TED Talk around African fractals. And it's an amazing TED Talk. Blows your mind.
Okay.
It's about basically the inherent fractals and math in a lot of African designs. And he even talks about the beginning of computer technology in those designs. So I remember that guy, and I said, well, I'm just going to email him. I don't know who he is, like personally, but I'm going to send him an email and tell him about what I'm trying to do. It turns out that Ron Eglash, and he's at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, RPI, they have a bunch of tools that one of them is about graffiti and math, and African fractals. So this guy has these math tools that people can actually use online and recreate cultural designs with by using math. So you plug in a field to math, translations, and then a design pops up.
Okay.
And so then,
that's what I was wondering. I was wondering what the interface was between, taking the data, the raw data, and then how it manifested itself artistically.
Right.
Yeah.
So people can actually they're called culturally situated design tools. And so African fractals is one of them. And then graffiti math. So we took Graffiti Grapher, was the name of the software. We took that to the kids, and they recreated the membranous, used the same translations that they used to make membranous stuff, rotation, reflection, and so on, and applied those to creating their own designs. Those designs were then brought off the computer, or printed, and traced and whatever, and created a mural from it. And that mural had, the cultural stuff in it, and it also triggered augmented reality images that they made digitally when you point your mobile device at it. So now you have the culture piece, you have the art, and then you have math and science and technology. So that is what's called STEAM. Science, technology, engineering, but it depends, you don't necessarily have to have everything, but science, technology, engineering, art, and math, and the STEM movement is just without the art. So, in 2010, the STEAM movement came up at Rhode Island School of Design, and people started talking about STEAM and whatever. I threw culture in there, but you don't need a C in. You can't put a C in there. But I'm like, one of the things I noticed is these local kids in Albuquerque, once they realized that this culture was there, like from them, they were all into it, doing math.
Well, the cool thing is they get immediate ownership, and not only that, but because of the tools, they get immediate feedback too of their contribution, their experimentation, and their own, their own vision, their own art. So I mean, it's such a natural, because stimulating and exciting kids with art is an age-old formula, and the fact that when you provide them with the tools that allow them complete ownership of what it is they're creating, I mean, that's just a huge thing that's going to give you some longevity in their interest, because once they start, it's tough to stop. I mean, I remember this girl who had a mother who was a computer programmer and just refused to do anything having to do with computer programming, and now look where she is. So
sounds familiar.
I'm not naming names or pointing fingers or anything, but do you have we've got a few of the websites, they've been popping up here. Do you have what's the best site for people who want to look at exactly, the steps you took and the tools you use? I'm looking at, we've got Janelle, we've got cdscrpi.edu. Which one? That one is the edu link is to where?
The what?
The edu link that you put in the chat room is to where?
Oh, that's the Culture Situated Design Tools from Ron English.
Okay, cool, great, that's fine. All right, so and for those people who pick this up as a podcast because you're too lazy or too busy on a Friday night, you're just going to have to hunt around on.
It's Valentine's Day.
Yeah, well, yeah, but you know, all right, okay, I guess I could. Yeah, all right, fine. But anyway, so here we are in the last half hour of the show. Let's talk about, you know, you said you're still working on your PhD, am I correct?
Yes, you're correct.
And you're going to get it in what?
A year from now.
and what's your dissertation going to be on?
Well, the title of the dissertation is Techno-Vernacular Creativity and Learning in Underrepresented Communities of Practice.
Yeah, that'll be a good one. They're going to love that one. No, I'm serious. I did one, and they made me go back and add about 80 pages to my dissertation because nobody believed what I said was right.
Well, I mean, there's another guy that you should check out, and his name is Rayvon Fouché, and he's in the same field as Ron English, and I think they're friends.
Okay.
And he created, his term is Black Vernacular Technology, or something like that. And basically, it is vernacular, of course, the language of something, and then the technology used to sort of communicate that. And so Rayvon Fouché did that, and I realized when I learned from the membres that the Tartary itself was a technology for them, and that they were doing this, documentation of Crab Nebula formation. I realized that this is not just indigenous; it's also an indigenous communities, both in Africa, continental Africa, but also in other non-Western communities and cultures. So, and a lot of that has passed down through generations and is in a lot of contemporary artwork.
Right.
So I realized that is, instead of it being Black vernacular, it's techno-vernacular, but it's also in communities that are not usually represented in science, technology, engineering, math, or even sometimes art. And that is something that I need to pull out and highlight in order to show, okay, here's the community of production. This is the production, the cultural production, and the artists and the crafts people who are doing it. And then this is the learning opportunities like they happen in Albuquerque that are around culturally situated art-based learning as a vehicle to sort of, bring it all together. You know what I mean? Right. In terms of between the two. So those are the two things. And so one of the things that I did is we played around with it and tested the model in Albuquerque, and then I also started talking to artists, contemporary artists, about, hey, you're doing science. Or, hey, did you know that you're doing technology or math? And some of them would say, oh, heck yeah, I'm doing sacred geometry. And I'm like, oh, okay. So now these artists are very aware that they're using these concepts, but why aren't they mentioned when they talk about STEM or talk about STEAM specifically? Because if the local kids in Albuquerque get excited by membres design and the history of the membres because it's something they connect to, then how about African American children? And what are the artifacts that we have that are like the members' pottery?
Yes, but see, it all boils down to your approach too. Because when you're trying to teach kids about some of the cultural imperatives that have shaped their culture, it's tough getting their attention. But I mean, when what you've done is excitation through art, and excitation through art /math/history. See, I think that, and I had a discussion about this week at a school about the fact that there is no reason why STEM studies should deny art, and art is not, and like you said, make it STEAM, because combining all of that, we're doing this at an elementary school here in Chicago. Combining all of those elements is something that kids can get excited about. Conventional teaching is very boring because now kids are presented with so much stimulation through mobile devices, through all kinds of channels of information that are readily at hand. The old ways are not working anymore. Plus, with all of the tools, when you think about how much computing power you have in a mobile device like a tablet or a phone or a smartphone or something like that, what you have is you have a pipeline directly to these kids' imaginations.
Exactly. And so the idea for me, so we did the model, it's a mural that actually exists in the desert, and you point your device at it, you get some content. But now the idea is, for my studies, is to show, okay, we have this underrepresentation of ethnic groups such as Latino, Latin American, African American, Indigenous people. And I'm not women are included in that because I'm a woman, but there's a lot more research going towards women than it is towards ethnic groups. So that's why my focus is specifically on ethnic groups that are underrepresented in STEM or STEAM. So and then the techno vernacular, the creative works that are coming out from the artists are the sort of motivator. And so two things happen from that. One is, I'm going to do some sort of learning workshop with young people and then gather data to show that they're more motivated to learn STEM concepts because they do the art.
Right.
And then I have the National Science Foundation funded a workshop to bring together research scientists, STEM educators, and professional artists of color, in this case from these groups, together to talk about an agenda to expand on this work. So, from conversation, we didn't really apply for it. It was a series of conversations with the National Science Foundation, and they said, we like that idea. We'll fund your workshop. So that's going to happen in March, late March. And then at some point, because of the bad weather, we had to reschedule. We'll do the learning workshop with young people. And so we have these two pieces of my study. One of them is identifying the artists and the kinds of artwork and the kind of elements that we think will engage young people like the Membrex pottery. And then there's the actual young people who are saying this type of stuff does make us more interested in STEM. And then we can say, hey, this is how you get more representation. Now, one of the questions for that, and I don't even know that there's an issue there, so it's not like something I didn't already think about. There are institutional barriers to the reason why there's underrepresentation of ethnic groups in STEM. And so, yes, I'm aware of that. But I'm also aware that there's these huge missing gaping holes in education around, for example, the Common Core standards for social studies in Georgia for 4th and 8th graders does not include slavery or anything about African Americans.
Of course. I mean, what they're trying to do, don't get me started about conservatives.
Well, I just wanted to point out that there's this.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing here, if I could just make one really nasty comment, I will, and that comment is the problem with today's political climate is, especially in terms of education, is that these people who have control over these curriculums are trying to ensure that everybody is as ignorant as they are. Okay, I got off my high horse. I'm done now.
Well,
but that makes your job and what you're trying to do an even tougher uphill climb.
Yeah, but there's a couple things happening there. There's some momentum around STEM to STEAM.
That's true.
So there's I didn't create that momentum; it was already there. But there are also, it was brewing, it was steaming before I even looked at that. again, if I'm listening to a contemporary artist, in this case like Sanford Biggers, he's like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm using sacred geometry so what Sanford does, I'll point this out, because we talk about members pottery, let's talk about African American artifacts, so I have to throw that in there really quickly. Sanford Biggers is one artist of a few, but Sanford, he takes historical quilts from the 19th century, among other centuries. Usually, I think it's like the late 18th, 19th century, maybe the early 20th century. He takes historical quilts and he repurposes them. So his own symbols, cultural symbols, creates new artworks with them. So it's very similar in the process of, and there's a whole bunch of scholarly research around African American traditional quilts or Afro-traditional quilts and the designs and patterns in them that are based on African designs. So there's this connection between the African design or African-centered aesthetics and the actual traditional original quilts that come from traditional,
Sure.
So there's this whole kind of area that is interesting. And then when you dig deeper, you realize that there's a connection between those quilts and improvisation, because they don't look like regular quilts you might see in craft museums. They are very specifically improvising with patterns. And they are, and that improvisation is one of the key pieces of techno-vernacular creativity, improvisation. You see that improvisation time and again. You see it in hip-hop. You see it in jazz. You see it in this case, quilt making. And you see it in African-centered work. So then you bring it over to, so you have that. So then you start, realizing that there's something to dig in there. And then I started realizing, and Ron put me on to the fact that a lot of these quilts have the visualization of African polyrhythm, which is now moving into music. And you can actually go to YouTube and type in African polyrhythm and see what that's about. But now we're getting into sampling, and in this case, sampling the patterns, sampling the music, sampling the sounds. We got an entire community of practice doing some of the same kinds of things, both in visual and in sound and video, maybe to some degree, that it hasn't really been studied. So that's on the kind of broader scope of things for the techno-vernacular creativity. And as it comes into different pieces of units, these are things that you can teach young people who are already into improvisation because they want to make beats, or they're already into improvisation because they like those patterns, or they're used to those patterns because their grandmother had that on their quilt. You know what I mean? Or they've seen it before. It's part of them. So you're tying two things together there. You're tying in the nuances of a community of practice in African and African American work, because you also see this in African, of course, in work like Elna and Netsui. I don't know if you know that guy. I'll type his name in, but you should definitely check him out. But he does the improvisation similar to quilts, but he uses recycled metal. And so you have this entire, thing happening. So, so that's been my study. And so the idea is that we're going to get in a room and we're going to talk about that stuff. And the idea of quilts having codes in them, that they're embedded with code. Then I was mentioning this to a bunch of folks at Georgia Tech. We often talk about coding, programming. Well, there was programming and coding in quilts as signposts. And so that's a different a very similar communication method used in quilts to tell slaves where to go on the Underground Railroad that we talk about just in terms of conceptually thinking about coding. It brings us back to programming, in this case, using quilts. Huge, And then the idea of codes and quilts, and then you get into GPS technology. Some of those signs and symbols look very similar to the kinds of things people use when they use GPS. Now we're getting closer to KML, GPS, and augmented reality, or augmented space. So in an alternate universe, a reality, imagine if slaves had mobile phones. They could point at quilts and give them directions to the next way station, to the next, location.
Well, I mean, seriously, that's exactly what they were doing, and they were using the current technology of the day. Between the quilts and the information that was brought to them secretly on trains by porters, bundles and bundles and bundles of the. And of course, I'm drawing a blank on the newspaper because I'm old. The Chicago Defender. The Chicago Defender was smuggled into the South and had a lot of the, some of the puzzles, some of the crosswords. There were codes inside the newspaper helping blacks move north into out of the South. So, I mean, that kind of that technology, and that's exactly what it is. That technology was in use, in ways that even now it's astounding to a lot of people that, math, science, star charts, art, and the art of the quilts. That's something that a lot of people do find that out in school. All of that, I mean, it's simply amazing, and that's the sort of thing that I think really sparks imagination to find out that, oh man, there's all kinds of stuff I can embed in here that make it more than give it some multi-layers of meaning. And
yeah, that's great. I mean, that's exactly it. And those layers, the idea that is what I call augmented space, which is not so much digital as it is about this idea of space being created in these processes, which I think is amazing for me to, that I felt when I realized that this was happening and had been happening for generations and had been passed down as something that kids, if you connect it the right way, they're suddenly doing what the kids in Albuquerque are doing, and they're tapping into ways that engage them. And these are high school students, and mostly don't with high school, and they were really into it. So yeah, and the article that I posted up on the chat is what happens. So something happens, and I'll say this will be the last thing I'll say about it. One thing that's important for me when we talk about historically or culturally marginalized people, one of the things we always do particularly in African Americans, is we give away our creativity. People take it and they put their name on it, and then it's no longer ours.
Don't get me started. Seriously. No, I mean, please. I mean, if we just want, I think one name galvanizes the entire concept of that, and that would be Vanilla Ice. But, but yes, you're absolutely right.
And so appropriation, cultural appropriation is what you might technically call it. And you have, the idea of reappropriating things, but cultural appropriation where a dominant group is basically stealing from the not so dominant group.
The subgroup, yeah.
Right. And so what happens is that also happens in academia. And so people were very kind of, a lot of academics were like knocking me down. Graffiti and math, no. And then I realized, okay, there's, how do I get in there and make sure that people know this is me?
Right.
And so the links that I posted up happened yesterday, and that's from U.S. News and World Report. And basically, they just put us at Nettrice. She's the innovator of that.
Well, there you go. Now you've got a certain measure of immortality, barring revisionist history.
Right. But it was just interesting because around the same time because I didn't know when that article was going to come out, and I knew I had done the interview. But I realized that some people were kicking around that idea. They heard about it through the grapevine and were like, well, that could be ours.
Yeah. Well, you're going to find that. No. I laugh because it's just so damn common.
That belongs to me. I did that 25 years ago, but the time wasn't right.
Yeah.
And so the language in that article, this is the innovator for that. I was like, oh, thank you. It kind of puts us, it's like, oh, bam. And so go ahead.
There is such a thing as writing a big-ass book.
Right. No, but then that's my dissertation first, and then I can write other books after.
No, I know, but I'm telling you what road could lie ahead. Because seriously, I mean, when you talk about this, this is your scholarly work, and this is work that you've actually done. I mean, you've put a lot into it, and you're right. It can be reappropriated. I love the word that you use for stealing. Reappropriated. No,
not reappropriated. It's appropriated. Reappropriating is one of those.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
No, reappropriating will be when you take that back.
Right.
Yeah. So they appropriate your work, but I mean, you're on the show. You're always going to have the podcast of this show. You're going to have the article, and you're going to have the dissertation, and you're just going to have to, work your name out there. And
the National Science Foundation white paper that comes from that workshop.
Yeah. Okay. So let's hope that we'll keep our fingers crossed that nobody gets on your wrong side.
It's already begun.
No. I'm just saying I don't want anybody getting on your wrong side because I don't see them coming out ahead on this one.
Well, it was funny because I sent the article to the program officer at the NSF, and he said in the email, "Thank you for these updates, and thank you for staying visible."
Well, that's heartening.
I'm like, wow, thank you for staying visible.
Visible, yes.
So whether it's Googling techno-vernacular creativity, because faculty have done that. I'm going to Google techno, and your name had better pop up. My name pops up. That's the only thing that pops up for techno-vernacular creativity when you Google it.
But most people can't spell that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Or the culturally situated arts-based learning. If you Google that, you're going to come up with a U.S. News thing, or you'll come up with something else. But the idea of it is that we're creating. I think about when I get angry about what has been taken from us that we create all the time.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But then what about me? What about you? Or what about, think about that for the stuff that we create. What are we doing to get in to make sure that that we're not marginalized with this?
Well, I don't have a problem with just shooting somebody, okay, but that's me. And that's probably why I got this ankle bracelet on from the sheriff. But no, you're absolutely right. But, I mean, okay, let's look at a whole genre of music that was stolen from us. I mean, and at this point, there isn't a damn thing we can do about it, okay? You got, what's that white boy's name who just won an award who stole from Marvin Gaye?
Malcolm Moore.
No, the one who stole. No. The Blurred Lines boy, Lines boy. What is his? See, I don't even know his name because I don't care about him. But I mean, you talk about stealing, you talk about appropriating. No, it's stealing. It's theft. At least the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, had the good graces to admit, who their influences were, but it's just too prevalent.
It happens in entertainment. It happens, but it also happens in academia. So.
Oh well, especially academia, because people will, they might cite you and then just put a little twist on it and then think they own it.
Right.
If I see anybody, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, please, it's your show.
No,
and just to let you know, we got about 7 minutes to go. So I mean, if there's anything else you want to cover, yeah.
No, I wanted to talk because it's recent, and I thought about it, and I thought about this idea of people coming forward and saying, "I'm doing this," and I realized it's art and science, and there's lots of art and science out there, but that's not what I'm doing. I'm talking about culturally situated art and science. It has to do with folks' heritage, and it has to do with folks, and where they're from and their ancestors. It's different, and so I'm not just talking about counting tree rings and doing activity. I'm talking about counting tree rings and understanding that as a cultural narrative about a people.
Right.
As well as the fact that it's also science. There's lots, and these are things that maybe the establishment may or may not be interested in, but I think that they are interested in it, and I think that they do want to commodify it. I think that they have continued to do that. And I'm not So I'm not acting paranoid at all. I'm sharing, but I'm trying to share in such a way that it proliferates and it comes back to me. You know, it goes out, and people go, "Wait a minute, that girl at Georgia Tech, you know, you didn't do that. That's her."
Let's ask a really relevant question, which I think you should think about the answer. You know, when are you going to do your TED Talk?
Yeah, you know, they don't pay TED Talk people.
It doesn't matter.
I know.
It doesn't matter. You know, for something like this, are you looking for the money, or are you looking for a significant contribution?
A significant contribution. I was looking for a contribution. I would say I wanted to be somewhat significant. I would say that it's a culmination of many years of work, all the way back to the story when we started out talking about high school and playing around with stuff in class, but also so to this point, that's a lot of work.
It is. And
I don't necessarily, you know, I see people dancing around. Can we join in on this? And then I see them suddenly go, "We want to join." No, let's create our own over here. Okay, that's fine, but don't stay over here. Like, you know. Oh, by the way, U.S. News put out a so, and I think for people, when we think about, like, the guy Psy, the Korean guy that came out with Gangnam Style, you know.
Right, yeah.
He copyrighted that and made millions of
dollars.
Well,
sure he did. Yeah, $5 million just from YouTube.
He made that money.
$5 million from YouTube alone.
Right. And then you look at Grandmaster Flash, who used a scientific method to create the mixer and crossfader. That got commodified. He never got that patent was Ring Corporation, not Grandmaster Flash.
Well, and then you had Stevie Wonder help develop the Moog synthesizer.
Exactly.
And you don't hear a damn thing about his name being associated with something that's significant. So no, you're absolutely right. But see, this is why I think that, you know, you doing your own TED Talk and at least navigating in those circles, because you first of all, you're worthy of it. It's not like, you know, you're a pretender or anything like that. You're worthy. I mean, your work is worthy of that level of exposure, because if you stick with this the way you probably should, you're going to be that expert. You're going to be that reference person. You know, it'll be more than just the one article when you Google the term that'll come up with your name on it. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
Because what you're doing is you're building an authority, and we are just as entitled to that as anything else. I don't say this to blow my own horn, but I mean, one of the things that I've done in a trilogy of books that I'm working on is that we do tremendous things. Okay, you know, look where math was really invented. You know, they talk about so and so invented the zero. Well, anyway, you know, we have done tremendous things in art, science, astronomy, chemistry. You know, all of these things that are, you know, originated in Africa before we had, you know, civilizations in other parts of the world, and there's no credit. There's no acknowledgement. I mean, we can't even have our own culture here in America admit that there's a black middle class. Right. You know, that is contributing to this country, that has made this country what it is. So your contributions deserve to be marked. Your contributions deserve to be observed and deserve to be lauded. We have about 2.5 minutes to go. Is there anything else you would like to chat about in the closing minutes of the show?
No,
and don't think we're not going to have you back, because we will.
I just want to say that as it relates to Afrofuturism, the idea of projecting outwards and seeing a future in which some of these issues that we're talking about is something that we have overcome. Right. Is extremely important. That we are no longer talking about Grandmaster Flash losing getting the patent for the crossfader, or Little Richard or whatever. We're talking about in the future that we have our own technology platforms, that we have our own Googles, that we have our own augmented realities, that we have our own curricula. These are things that we can look at as an example of Afrofuturism, that we're going to not only just going to space, that we're creating the technologies that people use in space, that these are all things that can be possible. And I think that that's important to keep in mind to wrap up.
Well, and the other part of the B part of this is, I've said this in a couple previous shows. This year, the term Afrofuturism is going to become far more significant than it has been. Mm-hmm. I think we're going to reach a tipping point this year in terms of not only the number of people who deal with Afrofuturism in its entirety, but also the number of people who are going to finally be exposed to exactly what Afrofuturism is. So it's not just a jump on the bandwagon thing. Afrofuturism is a movement whose time has come. It is here and now. So the other thing that I really like is how you embraced an online community the way you did with Second Life, because that's not normally, from a stereotypical America, that's not the province of our people. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? And that's also significant too, because to have a black woman who is not merely just a hanger-on, but a headliner, is a pretty cool thing. So I want to thank you for that. Okay. We have kind of run out of time, and I mean that was the fastest 2 hours I've ever had. How was it for you?
Great.
Well, I want to thank you for being here. I mean, you were just great. I mean, you made my job easy, and second of all, everything you talked about was just right on target, and it was a home run, because it's interesting, it's relevant, and these are subjects and these are issues that are at the forefront of our culture and where our culture is going. So thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate you coming on. For those who are wrapping up, this is the Valentine's Day edition. So thank you, everybody who stayed in to watch this, or listen to us. And I don't know if that's pitiful because you didn't have a date for tonight or whatever it is. But seriously, I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to remind people that this show is on every Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and that we want you to try to tell everybody, your friends, your family, everybody you can to help support this show. Tune in. And for those who don't know, BlackScienceFictionSociety.com is in the process of producing its first 3D full-feature movie. And log on to the site to see how you can help support the movie. And I want to ask, thank you for supporting this show. And I'm going to turn it over to our skipper, Jarvis Sheffield, the admin for BlackScienceFictionSociety.com. Jarvis, why don't you take us home?
Thanks for that introduction, but I'm going to keep it really brief. I want to thank Nettrice for coming on and sharing her genius with us. I've known her for a couple of years now, and I knew the level of work that she was doing. And people need to know that we have individuals out here doing things like this, groundbreaking work that needs to be spread so people know about it. Also, everyone that tuned into the site, everyone that liked it, that shared it, that tuned in tonight, I really appreciate your support. And also, William, as always, does a great job. And I just want to thank everybody for supporting what we're trying to do here with Black Science Fiction Society and Genesis Radio.
Well, on that note, I'm going to wish everybody a good evening. Nettrice, just hang on a couple seconds after we stop the recording.
Okay.
And for all of you who stopped by the show, thank you very much. And we'll catch you next Friday. Everybody take care now.